ourselves being unequal. You know, we're both human, so definitely we're both equal.
Difference equals inequality, or
sometimes difference is equated to inequality. And I think in how we are designed, how we're made, and the way that life shapes us, that there is inequality. And I think inequality is a part of creation. Some people are taller, some people are shorter, some people have brown skin, some people have white skin. So
diversity makes things interesting.
Diversity makes things interesting. It's the spice of life. But in that inequality, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. We can value the difference. And I think that's where we have some issues, is how do we value that difference that we see between one another?
So maybe equity is a way to get people to maybe their greatest place of potential, so that we can value our differences, because we're all in places where that difference is maybe a chosen difference or the best we can make it.
We're in different places, and I think we do ourselves a disservice if we think that everybody is in the same place, that everybody has the same opportunities. We don't have to look too far in our history and world history to know that we are not all shaped by the same social influences, by the same history.
We haven't all had the same opportunities.
We haven't all had the same opportunities. And those lack of opportunities have an accumulation effect. So it's not that, oh, well, you didn't go so far in school, and so that's just too bad for you. But no, my not going too far in school is going to affect my kids, it's going to affect their kids. And so there's a generational effect of inequality that we see. And when that inequality is structured within our society, within our social institutions, it's not just an easy remedy to say, okay, now do better.
We'll start from scratch.
Yeah, we'll start from scratch. The laws are changed. It's illegal for you to discriminate against me now. So now I can just go out and do all the things that you can do. That's not necessarily the case.
To clarify the difference between then the idea of equity and equality, the analogy of leveling the playing field is used a lot to describe what we would talk about as equity. That is creating a level starting point for people. As we talked earlier, you described, you used the analogy of a racetrack, a running racetrack, and for longer races, the start lines are staggered around the circle, which always, as a kid, I thought looked sort of unfair. I would rather be in that outer lane that's farthest up. But in fact, when we measure the distance, that staggered start time gives us equal distance ultimately, right? So that would be a sort of equity. Equality would be starting at the same line. Equity would be creating differing starting points so that we have the equal opportunity to finish at the same place.
Right.
Still doesn't necessarily mean that we're all going to tie in the race.
That's correct. That's where the problem lies.
Right.
Is that when it seems like I'm okay with you having more as long as I'm not feeling I have less.
Okay.
And that's where I think we are in many places in our societies, whether it's in large institutions or sibling rivalry. I'm okay with my little sister getting more as long as it doesn't feel like I'm getting less. And I think, unfortunately, the language that's used to describe whether we're talking in the workplace or we're talking in the home or we're talking in the court system or wherever place we might be talking about, it's always framed as a, well, they have more than they deserve, and that for I'm going to have less.
It's a zero sum.
It's a zero sum, and I'm not convinced that it's a zero sum situation.
There could be more for everyone.
There could be more for everyone.
We could take this into the arena of racial discrimination, of gender discrimination, probably of age discrimination. I mean, I was thinking to play this out. Yeah, disabilities. Should I, if I'm in a wheelchair, should I have as much access to the movie theater or whatever? But then I was thinking there are probably limits to that. Should I have? I'm not very coordinated. Should I have the right to compete in the Olympics? Or are there areas where I simply should accept my inherent limitations and go seek things that I can do better at. I'm probably never going to win the Olympics.
And I think that's where we need to be able to say, you know what, there are differences, and we need to celebrate those differences. Now, in competitions, you know, I would love it if I could win American Idol. I will never win
Me too.
American Idol. I would be on the goofy tape. It's like, oh, can you believe that she actually tried out to sing for this? So I think in those areas it's fine. And in those situations, I'm not feeling like something is missing from me. I can see,
it's not a basic right.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, you are better than me, and I would much rather hear the winner of American Idol than myself sing. So we can appreciate that. But when it comes to those times where I can't really see the difference, or I don't understand. Now, I can understand a singing ability or being able to run or jump, that might be a gift that someone has, an extraordinary talent. And I can see I don't have that extraordinary talent. But when I think that maybe it's something that is within your control, well, why didn't you go to school longer? And why are you choosing to live in that neighborhood? And why don't you just go fill out an application to go get a job?
Right.
It's your choice. So when I feel like maybe it has something to do with you or the individual, then I get upset. So why are you getting more money than me?
Or why do you? Because you start with...
Yeah, you start with an assumption that we're all the same, that we've all had the same experience. And also we have to look at not only at our assumptions about how we get to the starting line, but we also have to look at our assumptions. What is the ending line? What is the goal? What are we looking for? It could be...
So you were looking for lunch today.
I was
just
looking
wanted
for
to be
lunch
fed.
today. I just wanted to be fed, you know. But the people didn't even think about, and which is usual. I half expected it wherever I go. But it wasn't even on their radar, and that's what happens to us if we're not in a position where we have to question what we're expecting. Usually the norm when people go out to lunch or wherever, they're expecting there's going to be something. There's going to be a red meat, there's going to be a white meat, they'll be able to eat something. And it's not even on radar because we're in such a meat-driven society that someone might not eat.
Well, and maybe that's it, is that if I only socialize with meat eaters, I don't think about it.
No, you don't think about it.
The same discrimination against tea drinkers.
I know. Right? I said if I ever have a restaurant, I will serve tea, and when someone asks for coffee, I'll say,
make a fuss about having to make it.
Yes, coffee somewhere.
Well, and I read a little piece recently about a doctor saying, I treat all my patients equally. I treat all my patients the same. And the response to that was, no, in fact, you privilege the patients who are the most like you, who relate most to your temperament and your ways of understanding the world. And probably much discrimination takes place not because we're intentionally discriminating, but because we're not aware of different needs.
I think a lot of discrimination happens unintentionally. It's just not even on our radar, and we don't like to think of ourselves as treating people differently.
Well, no.
I mean, if we ask ourselves, if you ask anyone, are you a racist, a sexist, an ableist, or whatever, I'd say no. I treat everybody the same, and I love everyone.
Which means I treat everyone as if they were me.
Yes. And then you start to question, well, who's in your circle? Who are the people that you interact with? Who are people that you think are most like you? When do you notice difference? When they start looking at their close circle, they usually realize that they are surrounded by people who look a lot like them, who act a lot like them, or think the same way that they do. So they're not forced to think about, what if I was different? And how would my needs be met in this situation? And again, it goes back to, what are we expecting? What are we looking for? What is our desired outcome? I think some of the issues would be solved if we just were honest about what our outcomes. If we say, you know what, like inequality, and this is the way that it wants, this is the way that it's going to be and happen.
And there certainly are people. I mean, when I think about gender discrimination, there are people who simply say, no, it's very clear that women and men are expected to occupy different roles in society. Or that
but if we say that they can occupy the same roles, then we have to look at, well, how are we saying that that's the truth.
And what is there? I mean, this is probably a trivial example, but I read another little piece about somebody talking about bathrooms, men's and women's restrooms.
Yes.
Right? You and I both know that women need, for whatever reason, lots more bathroom stalls than men do, and that in a big crowd, the women will take over the men's room too and guard it at the front.
Right.
Is it fair? Is it justice to say no, 5 stalls for the men, 5 stalls for the women, duke it out, or is it justice to say let's make sure everybody has enough access to the facilities?
Again, you have to look at what is it that you want.
Right.
If you want to have happy women, if efficiency is the goal, then we need to have more bathroom stalls for women.
I imagine most of us, when we think about fairness and justice, think in terms of equality rather than equity. Is it just because it's simpler?
I think it's simpler, and because we can measure equality much easier than we can measure equity. I mean, if we're going to measure equality, we can just do the little tick marks. Okay, 5 stalls, 5 stalls, that's fine. We don't have to think about anything else and feel like we've done our job. And then you also have to look at who is it that's creating the bathroom stalls, right?
Right.
So in that case, this particular case, it's likely men, and they're thinking, well, I'm going to be fair. I am considerate to women. They have the same amount of stalls as I do. Well, they're not. They don't usually think about.
And they've never stood in line.
And they've never stood in line outside the ladies' room.
It means everybody has enough.
Equity means everybody has enough.
But enough might not be the same for everyone.
But enough might not be the same for everyone. Okay. If we go back to food, and we'll talk about dinner. Yeah. When I prepare food for, when my kids were quite small and we're making dinner, husband gets a much bigger portion.
Yes.
And the kids got a smaller portion.
Kids understand that.
And
I always
understand that. And and maybe they would rather have the chicken fries as opposed to the gourmet meal that's prepared for husband and wife being prepared. And but now that they're all young adults, Papa and Mama have the smaller portion, and the kids have the huge portion. That's equity.
That's what they need,
and that's fair. Their metabolism is raging. They're growing. They need. They're more active. They need more calories. Now, we all need a certain amount of calories just to survive, and I would imagine that we could all live on the same amount of calories. Some would do better than others if we just went it according to body height.
Well, but even then, size differentials. But we get if we go into some other area, we can understand it for food. We have the happy meals and those for smaller appetites. But when we go into another arena, we begin to think something might be taken away from me. So if my goal is to say diversify a workplace, and I'd like to see more women in the workplace. So maybe I'll give a nod to a qualified female candidate. So because the goal is to diversify. But sometimes we get uncomfortable, think, well, are we being fair? Well, you have to understand why do we have this imbalance in the first place? So if we recognize the causes of the inequality, and if our purpose is to address those causes of inequality, as well as to do something with the outcome, we have to be willing to be satisfied, or at least to be comfortable to some extent with some temporary inequality. And that sometimes is difficult for people to say, is it okay to be unequal? Is it okay to notice difference? Well, and then there are all these questions about pride and dignity and so forth, that if I'm getting a handout, or if I'm getting a leg up, or if I get a job because I know somebody or because somebody feels sorry for me, is that really fair? And in the long run, does that harm me? I got a job as a college student because my dad knew somebody who in conversation found out I was an English major and wondered if I'd like to do some writing. And I felt a bit guilty about that. And somebody finally said, yes, but if you can't do the writing, you're not going to keep that job.
Right. Well, long time ago, when I was in high school, graduating from high school, I was at a major retail store, and someone asked if I would apply to be a cashier. They knew I was going to college and thought, okay, she must be able to think and write at the same time. And I said yes. And when I asked why did they ask me, they said, well, we're trying to diversify, and we need more ethnic minorities. And so would you be willing to do that? And for me at that moment, I thought, Yeah, I'll do that. And I knew the reason why I was being asked. I knew the reason why should I get the job, and I did, why I would have the job. And for me, it was fine. It wasn't an attack on my pride or my dignity. For me, it was understanding that this particular company had a poor record in diversifying. They were trying to diversify.
So you could help redress a problem.
So I could help redress the problem.
And you would still have to, it gives you the opportunity to prove that you can do what you...
I still had to do the work. Ended up being cashier of the year a couple of times, so I could still do the work. But if they weren't sensitive that there was something wrong with the way they had been recruiting people or employing people, if they weren't cognizant of how that inequality had been built in, they would have never sought particularly to attract people of color into their organization.